Welcome back. All right, so as promised, I'm going to talk to you today about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, I'm not going to pick on the Leafs. I'm not. They're in a 4-game losing streak. There's a lot of debates about what's gone wrong and where, and honestly, it is a complicated discussion, thus the numbers on the board. There's a lot here to discuss, so let's go ahead and discuss it. The Toronto Maple Leafs currently with a record of 21-13-8, 50 points, which is on pace for nearly 100. For most teams, that's not bad. For some teams, that's disappointing. And for Toronto, it potentially is disastrous. This is a team that right now sits 1 point clear of Detroit. In third place in the division, could find themselves as a wild card. And then, who knows? The East is so competitive. Toronto could find themselves on the outside looking in at the playoffs. And then it's going to be a bloodbath, isn't it? Because how do you fix it? If you've spent all the money on your core four, and that is something people talk a lot about, but I don't think the issues with the Leafs are with that core four. And again, I've got all kinds of numbers on the board. It's not a madness board from a magnet perspective, but I think it's a madness board from a numbers perspective. When we look at this team, they're not producing the way they should, and so let's go through it. First off, in terms of their point production at this point in the year, they're 9 points off of last year's pace, where they were 26-9-7. The year before, 29-10-3, that's 61 points, and 59 points the year before as well at 28-11-3. Toronto, a very good regular season team, and this has been the narrative the whole way through. Very good regular season team that comes up short in the playoffs. The problem is now they're not a great regular season team either. So the previous year, 51 points, 23-14-5. The year before, 56 points at 27-13-2. And then both in 2016-2017 and 2017-2018, they had 50 points at this stage of the season with the exact same record in 2016-2017 that they enjoy now. Showing what a difference all these years make because, 7 years ago we looked at that and said, that's a great record for a team that wasn't expected to be in the playoff chase yet. And now we look at that and go, that's not good enough. So the Leafs, the expectations have changed. The goalposts have moved. And that's how sports works. The goalposts definitely move all the time. So when we look at this team since 2016-2017 and you look at the scoring, and I want to talk about the core four here first. Marner, 9th in points in the overall grand scheme of things in the National Hockey League since 2016-2017. 38th in goals, so he's a better passer than goal scorer, but he's very good at scoring goals as well. Matthews, 10th overall in points in the NHL in that time, 1st in goals. So he's been the best goal producer since joining the National Hockey League. Tavares, 17th in points, 13th in goals over that same period in time. Nylander, 30th in points, 34th in goals. But Nylander, of course, trending in the upward direction, which brings me to their core four and how they're producing every 60 minutes. So with this stat, it's simple. You take their ice time and you figure out how many goals and assists they're getting per 60 minutes and how many points and all that. So for Matthews right now, his goal production is 2.3 goals per 60 minutes played, which is the highest number he's had in his entire career. Besting 2020-2021, where he had 2.2 goals per 60 minutes. And points production, 3.4 points per 60 minutes. That's right in line with his career average. The highest it got is 4.2 in 2021-2022. His rookie year, he had 2.9 points per 60 minutes. So he's been very consistent throughout his career. Nylander is trending in the upward direction. So his goals per 60 minutes, 1.5 right now. It was 1.6 last year, which is a career high. Points per 60 minutes, right now he's at 4 per 60 minutes, which is pretty good. That's up from last year. We had 3.4, which was up from the 3.2, which is up from 3.0. So you get the idea. Nylander's been trending in that direction for a while. I've seen people saying, well, he's just having a career year, so you don't want to pay him too much based on a career year. Well, not necessarily, because, again, it's a trend. We can see that trend over 4 years. I'm not saying that he's not going to plateau, but if he plateaus at 4 points per 60 minutes, that's a pretty good plateau to have. Marner, 1.4 goals per 60 minutes is the highest it got 2 years ago. Right now he's at 1.2. So, again, he's not too far off. His points per 60 minutes at 3.2, not far off from his career average either. Showing that, since they're producing right around where they normally do, the core four for me has not been the problem from a production perspective. Tavares, it includes the first 2 years on the board being with the New York Islanders, where he's now scoring 0.9 goals per 60 minutes. We've talked about expected goals. He is expected to have scored more than he has, and he scored nothing. And the highest number on the board was actually his first year with the Leafs at 1.8 goals per 60 minutes. Points per 60 minutes, The highest it got was last year at 3.4, which equaled the first year with the Leafs. Right now he's at 2.7. So Tavares' numbers are down. Now, there's a trend that could be here because he's in his 30s, and this happens. So when Tavares' contract is up at the end of next season, if he decides to stay with Toronto, do not be surprised if his cap hit comes down, which should help the Toronto Maple Leafs overall, because we've talked about the cap hit with the core four, and starting next season, the core four cost you $46.653 million for those four players. So you can justify that based on the production. You cannot justify that based on playoff success. And with GMs and the salary cap and all that, playoff success will drive costs up. Numbers during the regular season will as well, but it does feel like Toronto's paying the premium for the production during the regular season, and they're not factoring in a lack of playoff success when it comes to dealing with these four players. I'm not saying that they're responsible for the lack of success when it comes to the postseason, just that if you're not getting that success during the postseason, maybe something needs to change. And when you're paying these guys that much money, it's hard to fix the bottom half of the roster. You just don't have the money to do it. We've seen other teams cobble together rosters, but in the cases of teams like Tampa Bay, Colorado, teams that have managed to get bottom sixes, win Stanley Cups and everything, there's still that success in the playoffs, right? Colorado had been in the playoffs second round multiple times, and before they broke through and won the Stanley Cup, you could see it was there. Tampa Bay, they break through, they win back-to-back Stanley Cups, and they populated their roster as best they could. They did the best they could with the salary cap, and I know everybody, they were so far over. Well, Anders Nilsson and Miriam Gaborik were part of that way over the salary cap situation. They didn't play a game for Tampa before or after, so I really think that gets overblown. But it shows how Tampa Bay was smart. Tampa Bay got creative. And Toronto, at this point in time, they do have some money on LTIR, and I'll talk about that as well and how that's affected this season. But just their capology is not in the same realm as others in the National Hockey League. I would say that with Matthews, Nylander, Marner, Tavares, a conversation has to be had about, hey, all right, so you guys can make this, but if you take this, we can get a better supporting cast for you. So that's an argument that seems to work in places like Tampa and Florida. And we could talk about the taxes too. Sure, taxes obviously lower in Florida than they are in Canadian markets or in some of the other U.S. markets as well. But still, we see like players in Boston taking less than market value because they want a chance to win a Stanley Cup. They want a chance to win, and everybody buys into this idea that we'll take a little bit less money so that our general manager has the money to bring in a roster for us where we can win. So looking at the numbers since 2016-2017 in terms of points percentage, right now they're at 595, which is the second lowest on the board. In 2016-2017, they finished with a 579 points percentage. The peak is 701 in 2021-2022. Their goal scoring, 3.48 goals per game. That's one of the higher numbers, honestly. 3.49 in 2018-2019 and 3.8 in 2021-2022 when they had that 701 points percentage. It really feels like 2021-2022 might have been their best chance. And right now they're just trending in the wrong direction. Goals against per game is the highest it's been, 3.26 goals against per game. We've discussed their goaltending. I will discuss their goaltending again in a moment here. So the 3.26 goals against per game, much higher than last year's 2.68. Their power play's been good, 25.6%. Last year was 26. That's not the problem. 27.3 the year before. Their power play has been really consistently good. Penalty kill, 77.3%. It's the lowest number on the board, a little bit. 77.7 is the second lowest from 2019-2020, which is also a year where their goals against was higher at 3.17. So the penalty kill probably reflective of the fact that the defense isn't as good as it was last year. Hits per 60 minutes. I've got this on the board because what is the number one complaint that people throw at Toronto Maple Leafs? They're soft. Now, physically, in terms of hitting, they're not. 19.53 hits per game, not at the bottom of the league there, nowhere near. It's off from last year's total of 21.45, and the hits per 60 minutes peaked that first year of Matthews' career, 23.27. But again, there were no expectations on those Toronto Maple Leafs in 2016-2017. Didn't have the pressure. They didn't have these cool Justin Bieber jerseys back then. So It really is comparing apples to oranges at this point. Now, the depth is where I think the issue lies. And I've seen this debate online, and I'm going to throw this out there again. So, Zach Hyman, they didn't have the money. And nope, that contract's way too high. Edmonton's really going to regret that contract at the end of it. When people say that, it kind of breaks my brain a little. GMs don't sign a contract thinking, boy, I'm going to regret this in year 7 or year 8. They sign that contract thinking, I want to keep this player. He's really productive. He's good. Or I want to bring this player in. I'm willing to take on a contract that's a really high priced long term contract, not because years 7 and 8 are going to be great value, but because we think we can win now. Hyman, in his time with Toronto, from 2016, 2017 till he left, 329 games, 82 goals, 97 assists, 179 points. And he has a little bit of swagger in his game this year. 39 games, 26 goals, 16 assists, 42 points. He's on pace for 50 goals. Now, if he ends up with 40 instead of 50, that's still a really good season. And it's something that Toronto doesn't have with the players who've replaced Hyman in the lineup. Nazem Kadri, at the time he leaves, Toronto fans say, hey, he gets suspended every year in the playoffs. We can do without Kadri. Kadri hasn't been suspended in the playoffs since. He's been at the center of some controversy, but he hasn't been suspended. 235 games with the Leafs before he left. 80 games, 80 assists, 160 points. Again, from 2016-17 until he left. This year, with Calgary, 44 games, 15 goals, 21 assists, 36 points. Kadri's still a very effective second-line center in the National Hockey League. And while his contract is a bit high, yep, absolutely, it is still cheaper than the contract for any of the core 4. And if Toronto had that instead of one of the core 4, they'd have that extra money to bring somebody else in and maybe fix the defense, maybe fix something, right? So this is the issue. Michael Bunting left the team in the offseason, played 161 games as a Leaf, 46 goals, 66 assists, 122 points. That should be 112. Let's change that to 112. Just doing the math in my head, I'm like, that's 112. So this year for Carolina, 42 games, 9 goals, 18 assists, 27 points. He's not setting the world on fire in Carolina, but neither are the replacements. So Max Domi was brought in on a 1-year contract. He has 4 goals, 19 assists, 23 points in 42 games. The effort is there. The production is not. Production's not where you would want it to be. Bertuzzi, 6 goals, 13 assists, 19 points in 42 games. Same thing. When Domi and Bertuzzi were brought in, it was the idea that, hey, Leafs are going to be tougher to play against, going to give them some sandpaper. And sure, Bertuzzi, Domi, they're not shy about dropping the gloves and getting physical in the corners, but you need that scoring. And between the two of them, they have 10 goals. Bunting has 9. So, and then you've got Matthew Knies. Rookie, good kid, 8 goals, 8 assists, 16 points in 40 games. So he's not on pace for 20 goals. He's on pace for 16. He could end up at 20, sure. But again, outside of the top 4, they're just not getting production. Calle Jarnkrok looks like he's going to hit 20 goals. 10 goals, 9 assists, 19 points in 42 games. But if Jarnkrok is your 5th or 6th most, productive forward, is that a good sign? Is he a top 6 guy? And if your answer is probably not, well, that speaks to part of the problem. Nick Robertson, 26 games, 6 goals, 6 assists, 12 points. I'm very happy Nick Robertson's finally got his chance at the NHL level. I think he's good. Anytime there was discussion about whether or not he fit in Toronto, I was like, send him to Dallas, have him play with his brother. But Robertson, as good as he is, and he can be, it just feels like Toronto needs more. They need something else depth-wise. That they need a top 6 forward and they need a top 4 defenseman in order to kind of right the ship. Even though, as I mentioned in a video this morning, it feels like a lot of this is mental too. So I'll get into the goaltending last. So right now, they have had 3 losses trailing after 2, which is tied with the 2017-2018 season for the most they've had. So the 3 losses when trailing or when leading after 2, that's not a thing in Toronto. Not at this point in the season. We've got half the year left. The 4 wins when trailing after 2 trails the 2017-2018 season where they had 5 for the most. So what's baffling with Toronto is if they're losing going into the 3rd, they've shown they can come back. But if they're winning going into the 3rd, they've shown they can lose, which tells me a lot of this is just mental mistakes. And those are the mistakes that just has to drive a coach nuts, because when you're in practice, everything's going to work fine because they know the system, they know what they're supposed to do. But then in a game situation, once that ball starts to roll, whether it's for you or against you, it just keeps rolling. And so it has to be frustrating for Sheldon Keefe, whose job is absolutely, I would think, on the line right now. Toronto can't afford to have a bad year, especially with the contracts that have been signed. And you have a new GM in Brad Treliving, so while he may like Sheldon Keefe, Keefe's not technically his guy. The 688 winning percentage when they're leading after the first is the lowest winning percentage when leading after the first of any of the teams on this board. They've had 11 games decided in overtime. There's been a lot of discussion about them going to overtime as often as they have. The highest total for overtime games where they've been decided in overtime is 16 in this era. So this is a team that's not winning a lot in regulation, which doesn't, I don't think that makes a big difference. I think that if you win in overtime rather than regulation, it's still 2 points. For me in the power rankings, it makes a difference, but from a standings perspective, it doesn't. And so I don't really worry so much about it. But definitely at this point, what's happening is now they're not getting those wins in extra time, and they're just flat out losing some of these games. So the defense needs to be discussed a little bit. The production from the defense, not where you want it to be. And this is where they need a top four defenseman. They're missing Klingberg. They're missing Muzzin. Muzzin, it doesn't sound like he'll play again, that his career's probably finished. Klingberg, it may not be too far off for him. I hope Klingberg's healthy next fall and he's good to go. But at the time that he left the lineup, he wasn't playing well enough either. This is a team that needs another point man. They could use a guy like... It's the first name that occurred to me is Sean Durzi, and I'm aware that Sean Durzi was Toronto property at one point. So it just feels like Durzi's a guy who does very well on the power play. He can drive the offense. He might be kind of scary 5-on-5 defensively, but he can drive the offense. I apologize. It's just the first name that came to mind. Morgan Rielly is their leading scorer on the blue line. 42 games, 7 goals, 28 assists, 35 points. McCabe, 36 games, 2 goals, 13 assists, 15 points. Liljegren, 25 games, 2 goals, 7 assists, 9 points. Brody, 41 games, 9 assists. Timmins, 14 games, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. Giordano, 29 games, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. Klingberg played 14 games, 5 assists. Very, very unlikely he returns this season. Ligason, 21 games, 3 assists. Benoit, 1 assist in 28 games. I know Benoit's kind of endeared himself to some of the Leafs media and Leafs fans, but again, you need production, and Lajoie, pointless in the 4 games that he's had. And I just mean that he hasn't produced points, not that Max Lajoie is pointless. So it's a defense that has some good players there, but the wow factor's kind of missing past O'Reilly. Past Riley, I should say, not O'Reilly. Now, where the trick comes in for Toronto is the fact that it's not cheap to pick up a top 4 defenseman. It's expensive. And this is where that salary cap hit for the top 4 comes in. And the fact that Toronto, if you go to cap friendly, they are the absolute tip top when it comes to salary cap situation. So it's an issue. It's absolutely an issue for this team. And the LTIR, you've got Muzzin, you've got Klingberg, you've also got Matt Murray. Matt Murray was brought in to try to fix the goaltending, which has been an ongoing struggle for the Leafs. The weird thing is, I think Freddie Anderson was the best of the goalies. 149 wins over this era. I think he was a good goalie. And I know when the Leafs would lose a game in the playoffs and get shut out, the argument was usually, well, they needed a save from Anderson on that one play. And it's like, they got shut out. Like, I understand that there might be a goal here and there that you're not happy with, but when you get shut out, either the goalie's not the problem or it's a team effort, right? Campbell is the second leading goalie in wins with 51. Samsonov, 32. McElhinney and Wall are next with 17. Then you have Matt Murray with 14, Mrazek with 12. You have Shalgren with 11, Hutchinson with 10. Jones and Sparks are tied with 8. Bebo and Riddick both had 1 in their time with Toronto. This is a team that's gone through a lot of goalies over the time of Austin Matthews. So there was a goalie graveyard in Toronto or in Vancouver at one point. I think it's kind of moved to Toronto. And it is a matter of they haven't had that dominant, really excellent starting goaltender. The closest I think they've had to that is Freddie Anderson, who is no longer with the team. Of course, he's currently, he's trying to come back from his own health issues. But, I mean, it's been an ongoing situation. And they brought in Murray's contract. It's not worked out with Murray. He gets injured all the time, too. Samsonov, a very up-and-down goaltender. They haven't had the goalie. So you need depth up front. You need more help on the blue line. You definitely need to solidify your goaltending. Like, Jones is a good goaltender. I like Jones. I've always liked Jones. I've always rooted for Martin Jones. Is Jones a starter if you're going to win a Stanley Cup? I don't think so. And that's part of the problem is that Jones has been their best goaltender this year. It's a limited sample size, but I think of the goalies who've played, he's been their best. Wall's been very good too, and Wall will be the starter once he returns. But is Wall the goalie who's going to take him to the Stanley Cup? Do they go to the promised land with him? He doesn't really have that experience. There are instances over NHL history where a goaltender with not a lot of experience has won a Stanley Cup. Patrick Roy comes to mind. But it's rare. It's very rare. And for Toronto at this point, they're so far into this era that it just feels weird that they've never really figured out the goaltending and steadied that goaltending situation. So I don't know what the solution is going to be for Toronto. I don't envy Brad Treliving the job that he has to try to fix this. I think that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to have to ask themselves some pretty tough questions when this season's done. If they keep trending in the direction they're going, Detroit could pass them. Detroit's only 1 point back. And then you're into the wild cards. You're into the weeds there. And then you've got to worry about Pittsburgh. You've got to worry about Washington. You've got to worry about a lot of teams that you weren't worried about before, like the Islanders, and teams that are going to be quite happy to knock Toronto out of the playoffs. I could foresee a scenario where Pittsburgh ends up getting that number 2 wild card over Toronto. And then at that point in time, I would imagine between media, fans, and just everybody, I could just imagine how that would go. If Kyle Dubas goes to Pittsburgh, they go back to the playoffs, and then Toronto misses. So it's a lot of pressure in Toronto. I get that. I think that's part of the reason why these teams have their struggles here and there mentally. I think there's a lot of pressure. And I understand that when these guys are getting paid a combined $46 million in cap hit, you don't want to hear about them being under pressure and having their struggles at times, but it's still there. The extra money doesn't mean that the pressure is not there. It just means you can have a nicer house while you're under that pressure. So what do they do? And that's the question we're going to have to see what the answer is over the next couple of months. But it is going to be fascinating to see what Toronto ends up doing to try to fix this. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Again, I tried to go over everything with Toronto that we could possibly discuss on this matter. The depth scoring being an issue, the defense being an issue, the goaltending, and just the fact they're trending in the wrong direction. It really feels like this is a Toronto team that peaked a few years ago, had their best chance of maybe winning a Stanley Cup a few years ago, and now those odds are starting to get longer, even though their core 4 are still producing really well. Marner is their number 3 scorer currently, Matthews number 2, Nylander number 1, Tavares is number 5, and Morgan Rielly's number 4. So the 5 top paid guys are their top scorers, but do they have enough behind them? Did they give too much money to guys like Domi and Bertuzzi? Should they have spent that elsewhere? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. Like I said, I don't want to pick on Toronto. I think that's something that I just don't get behind. I don't want to feel like I'm picking on them, but it's worthy of a discussion. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.